start. So, understanding the key factors shaping Papua New Guinea's decentralization. More or less, we've talked about some of the key factors already on Thursday. So, we will be more focused on the political aspect of decentralization, and we will be more concerned about the dominance of the role of members of parliament after the 1995 reform. All right, so there were two reforms. One reform in 1976 was had a provincial assembly being elected directly. The other reform had the component of provincial assembly, but now the provincial assembly is indirectly elected. So within the space of these two laws here, we've seen after 1995 the dominance of the role of MPs in parliament, okay, national MPs. So let's start. So basically, decentralization talks about the transfer of power. So transfer of power, authority, and responsibility from the central to the local governments. Now in Papua New Guinea, post-colonial efforts to manage post-colonial efforts in decentralization was aimed to manage a diverse and geographically dispersed population. So Papua New Guinea needs a working decentralization system. We are not a heterogeneous, homogeneous society. We're an heterogeneous society. We have people from all cultures and tribes, about 800 different languages, 700 different tribes in our country. So the call for a decentralization system that meets this need must also be taken into context when talking about decentralization. So the colonial efforts, the central government in the colonial times found out that they had a challenge to manage the diverse, dispersed people of our country. So after independence, 1972, 1973, and the issue on Bougainville, there was an effort political effort, okay, for the need to balance both national unity and regional autonomy. So these two ideas here. So because of the Bougainville separatist movement, the Somalia government and the cabinet were so focused on national unity that they established 20 provincial government systems. That is to ensure that there is, or during the time, there should not be any more separatist movements apart from Bougainville. So the Decentralization Institute was to address that. Now, as we go on in this lecture, we will try to explore the factors that have driven and shaped decentralization since independence. All right, and understanding these factors is crucial for comprehending Papua New Guinea's decentralization system. So we look at the factors that drive and shape decentralization and understanding these factors here. Last week's lecture, we've looked at this, okay, the factors here, and there are four of them. When you want to talk about or read about decentralization, you will notice that one of these factors, or two or three factors, always come into discussion. Number one is the ever dominance of the national politicians, the national MPs. And that led to the control of, or central government's control over the provinces and local governments. So after 1995, the provincial assembly no longer exists as it is. So 1995 reform opted for an indirectly elected provincial assembly, and at the same time, that strengthens the position and power of the national MPs. Secondly, the dominance of district MPs. So when that happened, national MPs, the district MPs now become important and their role became significant in the decentralization process. And you can see that as a result of this, the provincial governors, their role now have become reduced and sometimes redundant. So after 1995, the provincial governors now are calling for autonomy. So in effect, that call for autonomy is calling for the 1976 decentralization organic law on provincial government. They are calling for a directly elected assembly. So in the old organic law, the 1976 one, you can actually, the provincial assembly has power to pass and legislate laws in the province and not to wait for the national government to pass or legislate laws. So that power to pass, debate important laws at the local level was taken away by the 1995 reform. Now, when that happened, this puts the whole idea of representative democracy in our country in a dangerous territory. So we have at the national government a representative model of democracy, but not at the provincial or local government. Local government is being run by the national MPs, which is authoritarian in nature and dictatorial. And it's bad for Papua New Guinea's decentralization and as far as representative democracy is concerned. Next is the countervailing forces of provincial autonomy. So because of the dominance of national MPs after 1995, governors now have been calling for autonomy. Governors now are becoming their role as governors and their role as leaders of the province have been undermined by the 1995 reform. So the focus on service delivery has skipped the provincial government level down to the district. And that is where the national MPs, and also consolidate the national MPs' power. Number 4, the nature of PNG politicians. We have a clientelistic structure, fragmented, unstable political environment that shapes decentralization efforts. So our national politics at the national level have been affected or have affected the decentralization system. Lots of votes of no confidence had led to a very unstable political environment. But you can see at the heart of the decentralization policy or decentralization discussion, the national MPs would not easily give away power to the governor or the autonomy at this stage here. That is why you might be asking, why do we have national election, which is run every 5 years, but not so much of local government elections? Why are our local governments not given priority? So the importance here is that these factors are interconnected and collectively influence the decentralization process in Papua New Guinea. So when you read about decentralization, make sure to try and pick up these 4 factors here. They will pop up in most of the discussions on decentralization. Okay, let's look at centralizing power or centralization of power. So the aim of the 1995 reform or the law was to take away power from the regional government. And in doing so, ensuring or strengthening the centralization of power at Waigani. So national MPs have historically resisted sharing power. That has been the trend. The national MPs do not want to share power with the provincial level. And you can understand why. If power is given to the provincial politicians, they are with the people. And when it comes to election, the national MPs, their electoral seat is not guaranteed if you have a functioning local government system. A functioning in a sense that not so much of delivery of goods and services, but so much of people's participation in decision making of their local localities. Okay, participation in discussing education, health, and other infrastructural or other policies. So national MPs have been, after 1995, the laws after 1995 have moved towards more of centralizing political power at Waigani than the provinces. So the abolition of provincial elections in 1995 is a prime example of this power dynamic here. After 1995, provincial elections are not, and still today, are not given support and attention. Why? Support and attention in decentralization in our country is more about efficiency and service provision. It's not about empowerment and autonomy. So when you take out empowerment and autonomy, you are suppressing your people at the local level. They don't have a voice. And if they don't have a voice, then that defeats the purpose of a representative democracy. So the impact on decentralization here, so the organic law on provincial and local level government, OLP-LLG in 1995, centralized authority and reduced provincial autonomy. So the governors are fighting over this autonomy here. They are fighting over to go back to the 1976 law. And national MPs' ability to change the constitution gives them significant leverage over provincial governments. Provincial assembly, okay, the national MPs, what gives them an upper hand is that with 2/3 majority, they can change the organic law. They can change the law on the floor of parliament. That so much power is given to them. And that 2/3 majority, in a way, affected the decentralization policy or decentralization aspect in our country. Now we look at the constitutional amendment. So national MPs can amend the constitution with 2/3 majority. This is very dangerous when we have the national MPs now. More power and attention is given to the national MPs with the centralization of power. With 2/3 majority, they can change any law, okay, that suits them. And one example is the 1995 reform. So that gave them significant power, and it's very dangerous if they continue to have that. All right? This power is not common in federal system, where subnational entities typically have more protection. Papua New Guinea is, in other countries, Australia and New Zealand, decentralization of federal system is protected. Not so much in Papua New Guinea. So in other countries, the protection of this power of the regional governments is paramount, okay? Paramount and important, because changes to the decentralization will affect this idea model of a representative democracy. So Papua New Guinea is said to be what is called a quasi-federal system. Papua New Guinea system allows for some decentralization, but the central government retains significant control. And in comparison with other countries that have more entrenched federal structures to highlight PNG's unique situation. So our country, Papua New Guinea, has a unique feature of decentralization. In a quasi-federal system, you have a big central government with some powers delegated to the regional government. So that is the unique case of Papua New Guinea. Now let's look at the historical context. So in 1995, the national MPs moved to abolish provincial assemblies, centralizing power further. This was part of a broader strategy to weaken provincial rivals and consolidate control. So when they moved to abolish provincial assemblies, they took out the threat that the provincial politicians, was having, or the power of provincial politicians against the national MP, especially in times of election. Because provincial politicians has influence to support base in elections, or to influence support or voter support during elections. So this move set the tone for further decentralization in Papua New Guinea. Judicial oversight. The Supreme Court has the constitutional authority to interpret laws and challenge unconstitutional actions. However, its role in decentralization has been limited, with only one significant case challenging decentralization of power. So here again, the judiciary have not been significant, or has not fought enough to save decentralization in our country. Only one case was challenged, but you would see, and another thing is that the DSIP, PSIPs are not constitutional grants. So when they are not constitutional grants, that means that any one of us seated here, or even MPs, or even anyone seated here, we can't take that DSIP, PSIP mismanagement or performance-wise. We can't take these matters to court because it's not a constitutional grant. That is why the members of parliament have significant influence over the disbursement of these funds here. So the use of these funds is tied to ombudsman office and not other constitutional grants. All right. Let's talk about numerical advantage. So the district MPs, 89 in total, but now I think 100 and something. All right. Versus, or outnumber the provincial MPs. Provincial MPs has no standing when it comes to decentralization, because 22 provincial MPs are small in terms of trying to wrestle or negotiate the 2/3 of majority on the floor of parliament. And that must be understood when talking about decentralization. So governors have no power in parliament as well. So this numerical superiority has allowed district MPs to shift power and resources away from the province. And that led to the creation of the district development authorities. So the rise of DDAs have further entranced district level power and diminishing the role of provincial governments. When you have a DDA, you have provincial government and then you create the DDA. Focus now is not on the provincial government. The governors don't have any influence over development or policy-wise. So if the Waigani is channeling the money straight from, let's say, Port Moresby to the local governments, bypassing the provincial government. Formally, you have what is called the JDP-BPC, where the funds go to the provinces, and province through the governor, who is the chair of the JDP-BPC, would have to negotiate and discuss developments. But DDA Act has removed JDP-BPC from the provincial government and established it as a separate entity under the local government. So you can see an example of emphasis on administrative structure all in the argument for the provision of goods and services to our people. So the rise of DDA, or rather, DDAs control significant funding and have become the primary mechanism for local development bypassing provincial authorities. Shift in funding. There's been a deliberate shift in government funding from provinces to the district levels. The shift reflects the growing influence of district MPs and their desire to control local development projects. Here is another example of the ever-growing role of the national or district MPs. So within that, the funding arrangement, where does the role of the governor comes in? So the governor does not have anything to do in the scheme of things here, in decentralization, in the decentralization efforts in our country after 1995. So you can see, and that led to the governors now coming together and calling for autonomy. So the impact on provincial government, provinces have seen a reduction in funding as a result of the creation of DDA, or District Development Authorities, and that weakened their ability to govern effectively. So the concentration of funds at the district level has led to an imbalance in the distribution of resources across the country. And also that led to LLG's diminishing role here. So the local government now, once intended to be key players in the decentralization system or process, have seen their power and funding also diminish. So at the local government and the provincial government, the funding that usually goes to these two government entities here, are now not going to them. All the funding now are concentrated at or to the district development authorities. And when funding are coming to the district development authorities, this also consolidate the ever-growing role of national MPs and power for, consolidate political power at the ends of the national MPs. So all this has pushed the governors to now call for autonomy. Now why is that? So provinces, particularly those with strong regional identities like Bougainville, have strictly pushed for greater autonomy. The 1977 reforms, influenced by Bougainville's demands, marked the beginning of decentralized governance in Papua New Guinea. So Bougainville have called for a kind of autonomy, the 1976 autonomy, and that was changed. But recent development here, there's been a renewed push for provincial autonomy, driven by dissatisfaction with the centralization of power. So for example, Lihir gold mine in New Island, I'll give you an example. Significant revenue has been generated by the mine into the government purse. And then the government again decides how much Lihir will get. So the autonomy that the former late Governor Sir Julius Chen was fighting for was for New Highland provincial government to have most of its revenues generated through the mine to stay in the province, not giving to the central government, and then the central government will decide how many comes back to, or how much comes back to Lihir. All right, so the new renewed push for provincial autonomy tends to be more focused on the financial distribution, of monies generated or going back to the province. So when you talk about autonomy, Bougainville's case is different from the autonomy that is pushed by New Ireland, Eastern Britain, and Enga. So Bougainville's quest for independence and subsequent autonomy, okay, this has set precedent for other provinces to follow. However, that is not the same autonomy, okay, that is given to other provinces. Bougainville's autonomy came about as a result of the peace settlement in 2001. So the 2019 referendum in Bougainville, where the majority voted for independence, reflects the desire for self-government. So that autonomy arrangement was put in place for possible self-government for Bougainville. You wouldn't want the Prime Minister of our country give that kind of arrangement to the provinces. So after 2001, there has been call for autonomy. Okay, island provinces which have strong regional identities, okay, have been at the forefront of the pushing for autonomy, especially New Ireland and East New Britain. So their push or their resistance to centralization efforts highlights the ongoing struggle between the national and provincial interest. So now governors are calling out, we want that autonomy. Now, in looking or discussing the kind of autonomy outside from Bougainville, there are two approaches used by the government. They call it the selective and the gradative approach. So these two approaches here, okay, is now, okay, being talked about and to implement a kind of autonomy to New Ireland, East New Britain, and Angan. So gradative autonomy, or let me see, okay, discuss the possibility of selective autonomy, where certain provinces may gain greater self-government based on specific criteria. So, selective autonomy is given to provinces based on certain selective criteria. For example, the government would say that we'll see whether, if you have a large mine and if you have a large agricultural basin, agriculture base in your province, then we will give you autonomy through the selective approach. So you have to qualify, all right? So if you have a mining in the province, then that is one area for qualification for autonomy. So that is the selective criteria being used. And the other is the gradative autonomy. This is a phase-by-phase approach, where the government will give a province 10 years, for example, and by, let's say, every 2 years, the province would have to report on its effort to open up necessary spaces for them to qualify for autonomy. So a phase-by-phase approach, okay, probably 4 phases within a space of here. So that's the gradative approach. Now, if successful, okay, these efforts could lead to more balanced and effective system of governance. All right, but if you look at these two, selective and gradative approach here, it's more focused on fairness of distribution of resources, or especially fiscal resources, finance and funding. On the other hand, it also calls for risks of further fragmentation. If provinces are calling for autonomy, the central government is also afraid that more provinces will call for autonomy and thus weaken the central government's power. So every time when there is, let's say, more power, so 1976 organic law gave more power to the provinces, and that weakened the central government's role. And what the central government did, they took away those powers after 1995, through the 1995 reform. So now the central government is trying to negotiate a way of transferring some of these powers back to the provinces. So as political science, we like to study the transaction of power here. So the two reform itself in the decentralization effort, it's talking about provincial or regional government versus the central government's effort in negotiating power. So to close off, so the 4 factors here, okay, driving decentralization in PNG, national MPs, dominance of national MPs is very important. When you read about decentralization discussion in our country, you must also pay attention to the dominance of the national MPs. Also the district MPs, okay, they influence or the forces. Secondly, or MPs dominance, district MPs influence on decentralization, and the forces of provincial autonomy, and the nature of PNG politics. So when you read about decentralization, ensure that you try to see, okay, these 4 factors here, four factors here playing out. So understanding these factors is crucial for anyone studying PNG political landscape, especially decentralization. So going forward, when you read about decentralization, make sure you try to pick out, highlight these 4 forces at play. All right, so that sort of concludes the